Among the little-known pages of the First World War, the battle for Silver Mountain stands apart. This harsh mountain range at the junction of three empires became an arena of bloody battles where nature proved to be as merciless an adversary as the enemy troops. Rising 1,200 meters above sea level, Silver Mountain was a natural fortress with steep slopes, dangerous gorges, and an unpredictable climate. For Germany, control of the mountain opened the way to key transport arteries of the Eastern Front. Polish forces saw it as the last line of defense for their eastern territories. Russia viewed Silver Mountain as a strategic springboard for further offensive. All sides agreed on one thing: whoever controls this peak controls the entire region. But no one anticipated the price that would have to be paid for these rocky slopes, when thousands of soldiers would face not only enemy fire, but also the treacherous nature of the mountains. Silver Mountain is not just a geographical point, but an entire world where nature dictates its own laws. Its massif, rising to 1,200 meters, is a complex system of sharp ridges, deep gorges, and treacherous scree. The northern slopes are almost sheer walls with rare ledges. The southern ones are gentler but cut by ravines and covered with dense forest. The eastern side of the mountain transitions into an impassable plateau, while the western side drops into a deep gorge, at the bottom of which flows the turbulent Silver River, often overflowing its banks after rains. The climate here is a separate adversary for all warring parties. Sharp temperature fluctuations, where morning frost gives way to exhausting heat by noon and then drops below zero again by evening. Sudden fogs capable of enveloping the entire mountain in a milky shroud in a matter of minutes, making not only shooting but also movement impossible. Summer thunderstorms that turn mountain trails into mudslides. Winter blizzards that bury positions and make the delivery of supplies impossible. The strategic importance of Silver Mountain was determined by its position at the junction of three empires. From its summit, the main transport routes of the region were visible: a railway line running through the valley from west to east, and two old trade routes intersecting at its foot. Control over the mountain provided the ability not only to observe enemy movements for tens of kilometers around, but also to adjust artillery fire, making it truly deadly. Polish forces chose to defend using the natural advantages of the terrain. They fortified themselves on narrow mountain passes and in places where the slopes formed natural bastions. German units planned their offensive along rare mountain trails, seeking to use inconspicuous approaches. Russian artillery was positioned on opposing heights from where the best view for fire correction was available. But nature made its own adjustments to all plans. Soldiers of all armies faced frostbite and sunstroke, altitude sickness, and debilitating thirst. Heavy weaponry had to be carried by hand along goat trails. The wounded sometimes died not from their injuries, but from the impossibility of evacuation through impassable sections. Each side of the conflict quickly realized, here they are fighting not only each other, but also the mountain itself, silent and merciless. By the beginning of spring 1915, the political map of Europe was a complex mosaic of conflicting interests. The First World War, which began as a local clash, had escalated into a global confrontation, drawing dozens of countries into its orbit. In this maelstrom of events, Silver Mountain, seemingly an insignificant geographical point, suddenly acquired critical strategic importance. Initially, no one planned large-scale operations in this hard-to-reach area. However, after a series of defeats in the lowland territories, the German command sought new ways to break through to the east. Polish formations, having retreated into the mountains, unexpectedly discovered that the natural terrain greatly enhanced their defensive positions. The Russian Empire, seeking to secure its western borders, viewed the mountain range as an ideal springboard for a further offensive. But the main catalyst for the impending clash was the discovery of rich tungsten deposits deep within Silver Mountain, a metal critically important for the production of high-strength steel. In the conditions of a protracted war, control over this resource could significantly affect the military-industrial potential of any of the warring parties. The preceding months were marked by a series of minor skirmishes and reconnaissance operations in the foothills. Polish Jaegers carried out daring raids on German communications. German Alpine riflemen methodically studied possible routes to ascend key heights. Russian artillerymen experimented with indirect fire at unseen targets beyond mountain ridges. All these preliminary clashes shaped the tactical understanding of the command of the three armies. The Germans became convinced of the necessity of night operations, minimizing the vulnerability of advancing units on open slopes. The Poles realized the importance of creating a multi-layered defense system with autonomous resistance nodes. The Russians developed a unique method of artillery support in conditions of limited visibility and complex terrain. The Polish units that occupied the heights of Srebrna Góra were a blend of regular troops and volunteer formations. The core of the defensive forces consisted of 3 battalions of the 7th Rifle Regiment, reinforced by 2 companies of mountain rangers and a detachment of local militia, who knew every path and crevice intimately. The Poles' armament was heterogeneous. Alongside modern German and Austrian rifles, outdated Russian models were also used, creating difficulties with ammunition supply. Artillery support was provided by 6 75mm mountain guns, which could be quickly disassembled and moved to new positions by their crews. The morale of the defenders was exceptionally high. Many soldiers were natives of nearby villages and were literally fighting for their homes. The officer corps, for the most part, had combat experience in the mountains during previous campaigns in the Balkans. Polish defensive tactics were based on the principle of layered defense, utilizing all the advantages of the mountainous terrain. Forward positions were not located on the peaks, as one might expect, but on the middle slopes, which allowed them to fire upon the ascending enemy while remaining out of direct line of sight for enemy observers and artillery. The Polish command paid particular attention to creating a system of crossfire. Every section of the slope was covered by fire from at least 2 positions, making covert enemy movement impossible. On the most probable avenues of advance, camouflaged machine gun nests were established, often with stone breastworks that made them virtually invulnerable to light artillery. The Poles' engineering solutions commanded respect even from the enemy. Using local stone and a few trees, they created a system of dugouts and shelters capable of withstanding medium-intensity artillery bombardment. Observation posts were particularly ingeniously equipped. Many of them were located in natural rock crevices, expanded and reinforced by sappers. To protect against flanking maneuvers, stone barricades were arranged on steep slopes, which could be rolled down on attacking forces if necessary. On gentler sections, a system of shallow but wide anti-personnel trenches was dug, filled with sharply pointed stakes made of hardwood. The Polish defenders also masterfully utilized the region's climatic features. Aware of frequent fogs, they created a system of auditory landmarks that allowed them to conduct aimed fire even in zero visibility. Given the sharp temperature fluctuations, all key positions were equipped with double shelters, summer ones providing shade and ventilation, and winter ones protecting from wind and cold. The German units, thrown into the assault on Srebrna Góra, represented the elite of the Kaiser's army. The core of the Udar forces consisted of 2 battalions of Bavarian Alpine riflemen who had undergone special training in the Alps and possessed extensive experience in high-altitude operations. They were supplemented by a company of Saxon Jaegers and a unit of Prussian pioneer sappers, specializing in overcoming natural obstacles. All soldiers were equipped with lightweight gear, including special mountain boots with reinforced soles, ice axes, and compact field stoves that allowed for cooking without telltale smoke. The officer corps of the German units included several professional mountaineers, called up from the reserve specifically for this operation. The German command developed a multi-stage offensive plan, taking into account all the peculiarities of the mountain theater of war. Instead of a frontal assault on the Polish fortifications, the tactic of infiltration by small assault groups of 10 to 15 men through difficult-to-pass areas, which the Poles considered insurmountable and left weakly defended, was chosen. For this purpose, advanced reconnaissance detachments secretly mapped all possible ascent routes for 2 weeks, marking dangerous sections and natural shelters. Each assault group received detailed instructions and movement schemes, as well as predetermined objectives, key nodes of the Polish defense. The German command paid particular attention to logistics. Understanding that traditional convoys were ineffective in mountainous conditions, the Germans created a system of advanced depots, camouflaged in rock crevices and caves. These caches, filled with ammunition, concentrated food rations, and medical supplies, were located at different altitudes, ensuring the attacking unit's autonomy for up to 3 days. For the transportation of heavy weapons, primarily mountain mortars and disassembled machine guns, special teams of porters were formed from local residents familiar with mountain trails. Each porter could carry a load weighing up to 20 kilograms to an altitude of several hundred meters in a single trip. The technical equipment of the German troops also deserved attention. Instead of standard field telephones, which required laying kilometers of cable over rugged terrain, compact heliographs, devices for transmitting signals using sun flashes, were used. In cloudy weather, they were replaced by special designed signal flares, visible only from certain angles, minimizing the risk of detection by the enemy. German engineers also developed a system of cableways, allowing for the rapid transfer of people and goods across deep gorges. Such crossings were mounted at night using silent hand winches and could be dismantled just as quickly if there was a threat of detection. A distinctive feature of German tactics was the use of natural weather conditions. The offensive was planned to begin during the thick morning fog, characteristic of Srebrenica Góra at this time of year. Advanced groups were to move out before dawn using special night orientation devices, primitive but effective compasses with phosphorescent needles. Russian artillery on Silver Mountain became a true revelation of military art. The command sent elite units here. 2 batteries of mountain guns from the Caucasian Corps, a battery of heavy howitzers, and an experimental unit of mortar crews. These units were staffed by experienced officers, many of whom had fought mountain warfare in the Caucasus and Central Asia. A distinctive feature of Russian artillery was the presence of special reconnaissance and correction groups, consisting of volunteer mountaineers and professional artillery observers. These small detachments advanced to the most inaccessible heights, from where they transmitted precise target coordinates via field telegraph. Russian artillerymen developed a unique system for positioning guns, which amazed even their adversaries. Instead of traditional concentration of batteries on open positions, guns were installed in specially equipped caverns, artificial caves carved into the rock. Each cavern had a narrow embrasure, practically invisible from the opposite slopes, but allowing aimed fire at pre-ranged sectors. This arrangement made Russian guns almost invulnerable to return fire. For heavy howitzers, which could not be lifted to a significant height, engineers created special platforms with adjustable elevation angles. This allowed for high-angle fire over mountain ridges, hitting targets located in dead zones. A particular achievement was the development of special firing tables, taking into account not only the height of the guns and targets, but also air density at different altitudes and the direction of mountain winds. The effectiveness of Russian artillery manifested itself in the very first hours of the battle. When German assault groups began their ascent along supposedly safe routes, they suddenly came under accurate fire from Russian guns. Shells exploded among the rocks, causing not only direct casualties but also rockfalls, which were responsible for many deaths. Particularly impressive was the ability of Russian artillerymen to hit targets in conditions of limited visibility. When dense fog enveloped the mountain slopes, the German command decided to use this for accelerated advance. However, Russian guns continued to methodically shell enemy movement routes, relying solely on calculations and data from forward observers who determined the enemy's position by sound. German officers later noted in their reports that Russian artillery seemed to possess a supernatural ability to see through fog and rocks. An innovative solution was the use of shrapnel fragmentation shells with a delayed fuse. Upon hitting rocky ground, such a shell did not explode immediately, but penetrated to a certain depth, after which the explosion created the effect of stone shrapnel. Many sharp stone fragments flew in all directions, inflicting terrible wounds and incapacitating even those in relatively protected positions. The dawn of April 23, 1915, was unusually quiet. A thick fog enveloped the slopes of Silver Mountain, concealing the movements of troops from all three warring sides. It was at this moment that the first clashes began. A baptism of fire for many soldiers and a true test of all the command's preliminary plans. German assault groups had advanced while it was still dark. Moving along previously reconnoitered paths, they planned to reach key heights before the fog dispersed. Lieutenant Weber's vanguard, consisting of 15 Alpine riflemen, was the first to encounter a Polish patrol at an altitude of 800 meters. A short but fierce firefight ensued. The advantage of surprise allowed the Germans to eliminate the patrol, but the shots alarmed the main Polish positions. The Polish command, receiving a signal of the enemy's approach, put into action a pre-prepared defense plan. Machine gun crews occupied camouflaged firing positions, and artillerymen began ranging probable enemy advance routes. The position on the northwestern slope proved particularly effective, where Lieutenant Kazimierz Nowak had placed 2 machine guns in such a way that they covered the entire gorge through which the main German forces were ascending. The early entry of Russian artillery into the battle was a surprise to everyone. Despite the thick fog, the first shells landed on German assembly positions at the foot of the mountain with astonishing accuracy. As it turned out later, Russian spotters, who had climbed a neighboring peak the day before, had an excellent view above the fog curtain and transmitted precise coordinates via field telegraph. By noon, the fog began to disperse and the battle entered a new phase. German units, despite losses from artillery fire, managed to secure several key heights. The maneuver of Hauptmann Schulz's flanking detachment proved particularly successful. By traversing the eastern ridge, which was considered impassable, it reached the rear of the Polish fortifications at an altitude of 950 meters. However, nature made its own adjustments to the plans of all sides. A sudden mountain downpour, which struck Silver Mountain in the middle of the day, turned the steep slopes into mudslides. Several German assault groups were cut off from the main forces when mud flows destroyed hastily equipped crossings over the gorges. Polish defenders also suffered. 2 artillery crews were swept away along with their guns when the water undercut the edge of their platform. Russian artillery, protected in its rock caverns, continued methodical shelling, but the effectiveness of fire significantly decreased due to worsening visibility and blurred landmarks. By the evening of the first day of battle, it became clear that none of the sides had achieved a decisive advantage. German units had entrenched themselves in captured positions, but could not develop the offensive. The Polish defense held on key directions, but suffered serious personnel losses. Russian artillery demonstrated high accuracy, but could not completely suppress the enemy's advance. The nature of Silver Mountain, usually harsh and impregnable, transformed during the battle into a true accomplice in the hostilities, sparing none of the warring parties. Weather conditions changed with such rapidity that even the most experienced meteorologists of all 3 armies proved helpless in their forecasts. In the first days of May 1915, an unprecedented snowstorm erupted on the mountain slopes. The temperature dropped to 20 degrees below zero, and wind speeds reached 30 meters per second. German Alpine riflemen, despite special training, found themselves in a critical situation. Advanced detachments, which had taken positions on the eastern ridge, lost contact with the main forces. More than 40 soldiers suffered severe frostbite, and 12 men froze to death when their temporary shelters were destroyed by snowdrifts. Polish defenders, more familiar with local climatic conditions, had previously equipped deep dugouts with fuel supplies. However, they also suffered losses when a group of scouts, returning from a mission, got lost in the snow curtain and spent 2 days in an icy crevice without food or fire. Only 4 out of 10 soldiers managed to return to their positions. Russian artillerymen faced another problem. Gun breech blocks froze in the cold, making reloading impossible. Engineers had to urgently develop improvised heating systems using alcohol from medical supplies. No sooner had the troops adapted to the cold than nature presented a new surprise. The snowstorm suddenly gave way to a thaw, and thousands of tons of snow accumulated on the slopes began to move. A series of avalanches swept down the northern slope, destroying 2 German assault groups and a Polish observation post. Meltwater turned mountain paths into raging torrents, washed away fortifications, and flooded low-lying positions. Particularly tragic was the fate of a German field hospital set up in a natural cave at the foot of the mountain. A sudden flood inundated the lower levels, where the seriously wounded were located. Medics and doctors heroically tried to evacuate patients, but not all could be saved. 23 people became victims of the water element. By mid-May, the weather changed again. Unusually hot weather for these places set in, with temperatures rising to 30 degrees. The snow rapidly melted, exposing the bodies of the dead previously hidden under snowdrifts. The threat of epidemics arose. All sides had to allocate special teams for burying bodies in rocky ground, a task almost impossible in mountain conditions. But the most insidious enemy for all warring parties became the mountain fog, suddenly appearing and just as suddenly dissipating. At such moments, combat operations practically ceased. Once, Polish and German patrols encountered each other face to face in the fog at a distance of several steps. A short hand-to-hand skirmish ensued, in which only a few from both sides survived. The supply of troops in high mountain conditions became one of the decisive factors in the battle for Silver Mountain. Each of the warring parties faced unprecedented logistical challenges that required unconventional solutions and incredible efforts. The delivery of every cartridge, every loaf of bread, and every flask of water turned into a separate military operation. The Polish defenders initially had an advantage: proximity to their main supply bases and better knowledge of the terrain. They created a system of hidden mountain depots camouflaged in natural caves and crevices. Local residents, including women and teenagers, who could traverse goat trails inaccessible to regular transport columns, were used for cargo delivery. A particularly effective solution was the use of small mountain ponies, hardy animals capable of overcoming steep slopes with loads up to 80 kilograms. The German command relied on technology. Modular containers made of light alloys, which 2 or 3 soldiers could carry, were specially designed for the operation on Silver Mountain. To lift heavy weapons and ammunition to key heights, engineering units installed primitive but effective cableways, using wooden supports and hand winches. In particularly difficult sections, collapsible block systems were used, allowing loads to be lifted up almost vertical cliffs. Russian quartermaster services developed their own approach. Realizing that regular supply in mountain conditions was impossible, they focused on unit autonomy. Each soldier carried a week's supply of concentrated food rations. Artillery crews had ammunition calculated for 3 days of intense fire. To solve the water problem, mobile snowmelt devices were created, operating on alcohol and capable of producing up to 20 liters of drinking water per hour. All 3 armies faced a common problem: disruption of supply schedules due to unpredictable weather. Sudden snowfalls, avalanches, and rock falls regularly destroyed transport columns and blocked supply routes. In critical moments, commanders had to make difficult decisions: reduce rations, conserve ammunition, abandon planned operations. The impact of supply disruptions on troop morale was enormous. Diaries of battle participants often mention hunger, thirst, and cold as enemies more terrible than the adversary. The wounded suffered especially hard. The lack of medicines and bandages led to high mortality even from relatively light wounds. But it was precisely in the most critical situations that soldierly ingenuity manifested itself. When German units on the eastern slope were cut off from the main forces by an avalanche, Sergeant Otto Kraus organized food procurement by hunting mountain goats. The Polish defenders of the upper redoubt, left without drinking water, managed to construct a primitive condenser that collected moisture from the morning fog. Russian artillerymen, having exhausted their ammunition, repurposed one of the guns into a rocket launcher, using signal flares and homemade guides. By the 10th day of the battle for Silver Mountain, all sides of the conflict had reached a critical point. Food supplies were dwindling, ammunition was running out, and the number of dead and wounded grew with each passing hour. The moment arrived that military historians would later call the point of no return, when neither side could retreat without catastrophic consequences. On May 18, 1915, the German command decided on a desperate measure. Oberst Friedrich Hauser, understanding that a protracted positional war would bleed his units dry, ordered all remaining forces to be concentrated for a decisive strike. 3 assault groups, including the best mountaineers and experienced mountain riflemen, were to ascend the western slope under the cover of pre-dawn fog and attack a key Polish defensive node, the so-called Eagle's Redoubt. The Polish command, anticipating the possibility of such a maneuver, had prepared a trap. Captain Jerzy Komorowski intentionally weakened the visible defenses of the redoubt, but placed camouflaged machine gun nests in the surrounding rocks. When the first German assault group reached the plateau in front of the redoubt, it was met with crossfire from 3 positions simultaneously. Of the 30 men, only 7 remained alive. At this critical moment, the heroism of Unteroffizier Kurt Wagner became apparent. Though severely wounded, he managed to crawl to a rock overhanging one of the Polish machine gun positions and dropped a bundle of hand grenades below. The explosion destroyed the crew and allowed the second assault group to continue its advance. Russian artillery, observing the unfolding events from neighboring heights, opened massive fire on the western slope, attempting to cut off German reinforcements. Here, the skill of Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Smirnov became evident. He had developed a unique scheme of sequential fire. Shells fell in a spiral, starting from the summit and descending to the base, leaving no safe route for the attackers. By midday, the situation reached its peak intensity. German units, at the cost of enormous losses, managed to capture the outer perimeter of the Eagle's redoubt. The Polish defenders retreated into the inner fortification, a stone tower built in the Middle Ages and modernized for modern warfare. A multi-hour assault began, in which every meter had to be taken through fierce fighting. It was at this moment that an event occurred that changed the course of the entire battle. Junior Lieutenant Tadeusz Wróblewski, commanding a group of Polish Jaegers in reserve, noticed that the German offensive had left their rear positions uncovered. On his own initiative, he led his 20-man squad on a flanking maneuver, along an almost vertical rock gully that was considered impassable. This audacious maneuver was successful. The Jaegers suddenly attacked the German command post, capturing staff officers and disrupting the command and control of the offensive. Deprived of coordination, the forward German units found themselves isolated, without support, and unable to receive reinforcements. By the evening of the same day, Russian observers noticed signs of German units retreating from lower positions. Oberst Hauser's decision to cease the offensive was forced. Having lost over 60% of his personnel and most of his heavy weaponry, it became impossible to continue the operation. The battle for Silver Mountain reached its climax and began its movement towards completion. All sides had exhausted their resources, but it was the decisive actions of individual mid-level commanders who showed initiative at a critical moment that determined the outcome of this bloody confrontation. Medical support during the battles for Silver Mountain became one of the most challenging aspects of this confrontation. Each warring side faced unprecedented challenges: how to evacuate the wounded from steep slopes, how to perform operations in extreme temperatures, how to combat infections with a severe shortage of medications. The high altitude dictated its ruthless rules, turning even minor injuries into a mortal threat. The Polish Medical Corps organized a network of small field posts located in natural shelters, caves, and crevices. This decentralization allowed for first aid to be provided as close as possible to the line of fire. For evacuating the wounded from difficult-to-reach positions, special woven stretchers were used, which could be lowered down steep slopes on ropes. Dr. Stanislav Kowalczyk particularly distinguished himself, performing more than 30 abdominal surgeries in an improvised operating room set up in a mountain hut by the light of kerosene lamps and without anesthesia. The German medical service adopted a different approach, creating a large, centralized hospital at the foot of the mountain. For rapid delivery of the wounded, special modular sleds with shock-absorbing suspension were designed, allowing for the transport of casualties over rocky slopes with minimal additional injuries. German doctors also widely used blood transfusions in the field for the first time, which significantly reduced mortality from blood loss. A particular achievement was the development of portable oxygen equipment for treating mountain sickness and pulmonary edema, frequent complications among soldiers unaccustomed to high altitudes. Russian medical personnel distinguished themselves by implementing an innovative system for sorting the wounded directly on the battlefield. Medics attached to forward units determined evacuation priority using colored tags. This allowed for optimal use of limited transport capabilities. To combat frostbite, which became a real scourge in the conditions of a mountain winter, Russian medics developed a special warming ointment based on animal fats and coniferous extracts, which saved hundreds of soldiers from amputations. All three opposing sides faced a common problem: a shortage of medications and dressings. In these conditions, the astonishing ingenuity of field doctors manifested itself. When iodine ran out in the Polish hospital, it was replaced with a decoction of mountain lichens with a high content of natural antiseptics. German medics used thin mountain moss instead of cotton wool. Russian surgeons used horsehair for sutures. The battle for Silver Mountain concluded by the end of May 1915, leaving behind destroyed fortifications, thousands of dead and wounded, and a deep imprint on military history. Summarizing this bloody confrontation, one should assess the price of victory and what the participants in the conflict gained or lost. For the Polish forces, the outcome of the battle can be considered a tactical success. They managed to hold key heights and prevent a breakthrough of German troops on the Eastern Front. However, the cost of this success proved exorbitantly high. Out of 3,000 defenders, almost 800 perished, and over 1,200 sustained injuries of varying severity. Losses were particularly heavy among experienced officers and non-commissioned officers, which significantly weakened the combat effectiveness of Polish units in subsequent stages of the campaign. The German command was forced to acknowledge the failure of the operation to capture Silver Mountain. Elite Alpine units thrown into the assault suffered catastrophic losses, up to 70% of their personnel. The damage inflicted on the career officer corps was especially painful. 17 officers with years of experience in mountain warfare, whose training took years, were killed. Strategically, this meant that the German army lost the ability for a rapid advance on the eastern flank and was forced to switch to positional warfare in this sector of the front. The Russian army, though formally not participating in the ground battles for the mountain itself, nevertheless derived significant advantages from the situation. Effective artillery actions demonstrated the superiority of the Russian school of mountain artillery fire. At the same time, losses were relatively small, about 200 killed and wounded, mostly among forward observers and spotters. Strategically, the Russian command gained time for regrouping its main forces and strengthening its flanks. In the long term, the battle for Silver Mountain had a significant impact on the military plans of all participants in the conflict. The German General Staff was forced to revise its strategy on the Eastern Front, abandoning ambitious plans for a deep breakthrough and focusing on more realistic objectives. The Polish military leadership intensified its emphasis on defensive tactics, especially in mountainous areas where the natural terrain greatly enhanced the effectiveness of even small units. The Russian army learned valuable lessons in coordinating artillery support in difficult conditions and began actively implementing these methods in other sectors of the front. Besides purely military aspects, the battle held important political significance. For the Polish people, the defense of Silver Mountain became a symbol of national resistance and self-sacrifice. For the German leadership, the failure of the operation served as a sobering signal about the limits of even elite units' capabilities. For Russia, the successful actions of the artillery became a rare positive example in an otherwise unfavorable military campaign of that period. Assessing the ratio of expended resources to obtained results, it can be said that none of the parties achieved a decisive superiority. The battle for Silver Mountain became a classic example of how, in conditions of mountain warfare, even the most meticulously planned operations can be nullified by harsh nature and the steadfastness of the defenders. After the end of the First World War, Polish military analysts began a thorough study of the experience of the Battle of Srebrna Góra, understanding its exceptional value for the development of national defensive doctrine. A group of experts, led by Colonel Kazimierz Sosnkowski, future Minister of Defense, conducted a detailed reconstruction of all stages of the mountain position's defense, relying on participants' field diaries, fortification maps, and testimonies of surviving commanders. The analysis revealed several key factors for a successful defense. First and foremost, Polish specialists noted the effectiveness of multi-tiered placement of firing points. Unlike the traditional tactic of occupying peaks, placing the main forces on the middle tiers of the mountain allowed for firing at the advancing enemy while remaining out of direct sight of enemy artillery. This principle was subsequently included in all textbooks on mountain tactics under the name mid-slope doctrine. Particular attention in the research was paid to engineering solutions. The use of local materials, stone and rock, for creating fortifications proved much more effective than imported wooden structures. Stone breastworks not only better protected against bullets and shrapnel, but also seamlessly blended into the landscape, making positions practically invisible from a distance. A significant discovery was the importance of acoustic masking in mountainous conditions. Sounds in the mountains propagate differently than on the plain, and experienced commanders used this to disorient the enemy, organizing false noise sources that simulated the movement of large units. Analyzing the shortcomings of the defense, Polish military personnel highlighted the problem of communication between dispersed strongholds. When fog or snowfall made visual signaling impossible, many units found themselves in informational isolation. This led to the development of special sound codes and wired communication systems with backup, redundant lines. A separate area of research was the problem of supply. The experience of Srebrna Góra showed the critical importance of creating hidden depots with autonomous supplies at each significant height. The concept of defensive islands, self-sufficient resistance nodes capable of operating in encirclement for up to 2 weeks, became a cornerstone of Polish mountain defense in the interwar period. Polish analysts also paid attention to the psychological aspects of mountain warfare. Prolonged isolation, extreme weather conditions, and constant tension led to a special state called mountain syndrome, where soldiers lost an adequate perception of danger. To counteract this phenomenon, special methods of personnel rotation and psychological support were developed. After the battle for Srebrna Góra, the German military command initiated a large-scale analysis of the operation. A special commission, led by Colonel Wilhelm von Strauss, a recognized expert in mountain warfare, collected all available materials, from field reports to the personal diaries of surviving officers. The result was a 700-page report, unofficially named the Silver Lessons. The first and most important conclusion of the German analysts was the recognition of a fundamental planning error. The storming of fortified mountain positions by even elite units without prior weakening of the defense proved strategically unjustified. Major General Ernst Hoffmann, in his commentary to the report, noted, "We paid in blood for what could have been solved with patience." Particular attention in the analysis was paid to overcoming natural barriers. The experience of Srebrna Góra showed that traditional mountaineering methods, effective in peacetime, proved inapplicable under enemy fire. German engineers developed a new concept of assault trails, pre-prepared routes with steel staples driven into rocks, wire rope handrails, and small shelters for rest. Such trails could be equipped at night by special groups and used for the rapid transfer of main forces at dawn. Analyzing the tactics of countering defensive positions in the mountains, German strategists concluded the need for a comprehensive approach. Instead of a simultaneous frontal assault, a cascading infiltration method was proposed, the sequential capture of small strongpoints with immediate consolidation and the creation of their own fortifications before attacking the next point. A significant discovery was the concept of vertical envelopment. Unlike the classic flanking maneuver on flat terrain, in the mountains, a decisive advantage was gained by seizing positions located above the defending enemy. This required the creation of special high-altitude assault groups, capable of operating at extreme heights where defenders usually did not expect an attack. Technological conclusions from the battle led to the development of new types of equipment. Experience showed that standard uniforms were completely unsuitable for mountain conditions. Samples of multi-layered clothing were created, allowing for quick adaptation to sharp temperature changes, special footwear with modified soles for different types of surfaces, and compact chemical fuel heating devices. The impact of the Srebrenica Gora lessons on the further development of German military doctrine was significant. By the end of the First World War, specialized mountain units with a special structure, tactics, and equipment had already been formed. In the interwar period, preparation for combat operations in the mountains became a mandatory part of officer training. Training centers appeared, simulating various mountain landscapes and climatic conditions. The lessons of the battle for Silver Mountain continue to be relevant to modern military science even after more than 100 years. This local conflict, which unfolded in harsh mountain conditions, became a true laboratory of tactical innovations, many of which retain their value in the era of high-tech wars of the 21st century. Military academies of leading powers still study the experience of those bloody battles, extracting lessons applicable to modern conflicts. One of the key conclusions, confirmed by subsequent mountain conflicts from Afghanistan to the Caucasus, is that nature remains a decisive factor in military confrontation. Even the most advanced technologies have limited effectiveness when confronted by harsh natural conditions. As General Mikhail Kovalev, who participated in the analysis of the battle, noted in his memoirs, "Nature is the most impartial and cruel adversary, recognizing neither flags nor ideologies." Modern military strategists pay particular attention to the Polish experience of echeloned defense on Silver Mountain. The concept of the middle slope, positioning main forces not on peaks but at intermediate altitudes, was successfully applied by American units in the mountainous regions of Afghanistan. It allows for maximum utilization of terrain advantages and minimizes vulnerability to modern weapons. German tactics of vertical envelopment and cascading infiltration have been reflected in the modern doctrines of special mountain units in France, Italy, and Switzerland. These concepts have been adapted to the conditions of modern warfare, taking into account new technologies, unmanned reconnaissance systems, high-precision weapons, and digital communication tools. Russian artillery innovations, first applied on Silver Mountain, continue to influence the development of modern fire support systems. The method of sequential spiral fire and techniques for firing from covered positions became the basis for the development of computerized fire control systems used in mountain conflicts of our time. Logistical solutions developed by all parties to the conflict also remain relevant. The concept of autonomous defensive islands with independent supplies was adapted for modern conditions in the form of modular forward operating bases used in hard-to-reach areas. Cargo delivery technologies have evolved significantly, from mountain ponies to modern unmanned transport systems. but the basic principles have remained the same. The medical lessons of Silver Mountain proved, perhaps, to be the most enduring. The methods developed then for evacuating the wounded from steep slopes, systems for field triage of casualties, and techniques for providing aid in extreme conditions are still included in the training programs for military medics around the world. In modern military doctrines, special attention is paid to the psychological aspects of mountain warfare, first systematically studied after the battle for Silver Mountain. Mountain syndrome, a state of altered perception of danger in high-altitude conditions, is taken into account when planning personnel rotations and organizing psychological support. Perhaps the most important legacy of those events was the realization that there are no universal solutions in mountain warfare. Each mountain range is unique. Each conflict requires adapting tactics and strategy to specific conditions. As British military theorist Sir Basil Liddell Hart, who studied the experience of Silver Mountain, noted, "Mountains do not forgive stereotypical thinking. They demand creativity and flexibility from every commander." This idea remains relevant today as military planners face the need to operate in complex mountain landscapes from the Hindu Kush to the Andes. The battle for Silver Mountain reminds us that despite all technological advancements, nature remains a force with which it is impossible to negotiate. In the era of high-precision weapons and digital technologies, mountains still dictate their terms, turning the most well-thought-out plans to dust if they do not take into account the eternal laws of nature.